Hi, welcome to Outlaw Bookseller with me, Stephen E. Andrews, a writer, bookseller, collector. And as promised, I'm getting around to a Chris Beckett overview. A lot of you watched my video about a month ago looking at the most neglected contemporary trilogy in British SF, which is Chris's Eden trilogy. I've mentioned Chris several times on the channel over the last few years. There is an interview with him for about a year and a half. I'll put a link to that at the end. But because there was such a response to my coverage of the Eden trilogy, I thought it was time to do a proper overview and take you through all his work. The message I've been putting out consistently about him hasn't really been getting through, and obviously we've gained more subscribers and the backlist is very big here, but do watch it. So I thought we'd look through all his books and I'll give you some coverage of them, and all the hardcovers you'll see today are first editions. Somewhere I have a copy of his short story collection Spring Tide, but I can't find it for the life of me, and it's a signed limited edition. It's a very small book, it's a little octavo in laminated boards, but I can't find it. It must be in a box here somewhere. I've been working things out this week, moving stuff around, and I just can't come across it, so I do apologize, but I will pop a picture of that up on the screen. What I will say about that collection is that it's very avant-garde. Some of it is not SF, some of it is more like magical realism, fantasy, but it's clearly showing Chris stretching the boundaries of what he does and moving into more experimental areas, which is really good to see. So some background on Chris Beckett first of all. He lives in Cambridgeshire. He has worked as a social worker and a social work lecturer around the UK, so he's had experience in the field and also teaching in academia, and he wrote a textbook about social work as well. I think he's done a couple now I think about it. I think he's now retired. He's approaching the grand old age of 70, and he began his SF career round about 1990 publishing stories in the Interzone magazine, which is where most British SF writers of his generation got going. And he plugged away at that while he was working full-time. And eventually, when the new millennium came around, he started producing novels. His first novel, which dates to about 2004, is the very wonderful The Holy Machine, which you can see here in two editions. The Cosmos Wildside A format paperback, that's this one here, and the Cosmos Wildside hardcover. Hardcovers from Cosmos Wildside are basically print on demand, so you know whether it's a first or not is a difficult thing to say, but I think they probably only printed one lot off. Cosmos Wildside have done some great work over the last 30 years or so in SF, reissuing and reprinting neglected SF works, mostly by British writers. Keith Roberts is a prominent example of things they've reissued, and for example they've done paperbacks of Keith's books which never ever had paperbacks, which is really great work that they've done. They've also done things like D.G. Compton, Barrington Bailey, great publishers, so we owe them quite a lot if you like literary and British SF. Whenever anybody talks to me about Clara and the Sun, Machines Like Me, or any of the recent wave of AI books from non-genre SF writers, I say to them, never mind that, you really need to read The Holy Machine, because I do think that when robotics comes above ground, we do need to be concerned. It is the business of the future to be dangerous, and I do think in the wrong hands robots will be very dangerous indeed, and I'm pretty scared of them actually. I will quite happily admit this. I do think we need to put some controls in place on AI. Chris's second novel, presented here in the Cosmos Wildside A format paperback and its later Newcon Press hardcover signed numbered limited edition, is Marcher. And Marcher is a marvellous book. It's absolutely stuffed with ideas. It has a gentle thread of humour in it, and I absolutely loved it. And I would say if you like Dave Hutchinson's work, I would really, really recommend this. And in it, Chris draws on his experience as a social worker, because what Marcher is about, it's about a near-future Bristol, a city which isn't too far from here, the fifth biggest city in the UK, about a chap who works there, and he's like an immigration officer. And this was published around about 2006. And this officer deals with immigrants, except they are coming from another universe. They're coming from an alternate universe into a sink estate in Bristol, and they're accessing it by means of a strange psychedelic drug. And there are all sorts of characters. There's all sorts of classes represented. If you know Bristol, you really enjoy it. And it's really wonderful, entertaining read. There's really good characterization. It has all the virtues of a quality mainstream novel and all the wonderful ideas of a good SF novel. Now, what Chris told me was there are 3 variants of the text, and I've got 2 of them here. So there's this one, as I say, this is the New Compress limited edition, which is still just about available. They do a paperback of it as well. You generally won't find New Con in bookshops. You have to go direct to their website, and they're run by the SF writer Ian Waits, who's an all-round good guy. And Chris told me this is the 3rd version, so there's probably a magazine version, I imagine. I can't recall what he said to me. It is mentioned in the interview we did, so do check that out. And I'm yet to read this edition because I've only acquired it recently, but I really, really enjoyed this book and I really recommend it. So he got off to a real flying start with me, it has to be said. A big thing for Chris has always been short stories, as I say, and he came into the genre in that very traditionalist route, writing shorts while he was working until he could get a breakthrough with some novels. And these are 2 more of his collections. The Turing Test, here from Elastic Press, won the Edge Hill Short Fiction Prize, and it also won the Edge Hill Readers Prize in 2009. And the Edge Hill Prize is a prize that was set up specifically for short story collections in the UK. And Chris was shortlisted, and he was up against several people who'd been shortlisted for Booker Prizes and won the Booker Prize, and he beat them. And the adjudicating panel were, first of all, amazed that a science fiction writer could write stories as good as this. And secondly, they could see that they were easily the most vital stories, which just goes to show that if you can get people to read short SF of literary quality, they are blown away by it, because often they just haven't read it. And that was a big achievement for Chris. Unfortunately, Elastic Press had been going for some time and they collapsed after this. They just didn't have the money coming in. But this really broke Chris through into the big time. And there's some great stories in this, including the Turing Test, various others. There's a short story in it which leads into Dark Eden, his later trilogy, just a kind of prequel to that, which is worth reading as well. But it's a great collection anyway. I'm sure you can still get it. There's also the Peacock Cloak, published by New Con again. And New Con, as I say, they do all sorts of great stuff. I've not read this one yet, actually. I did have a paperback, a trade paperback, which Chris signed for me way back, but I've never got around to reading it, so I decided to upgrade to a hardcover limited edition. I think you can still get this. It's worth keeping an eye on the New Con website, because every now and again they have sales, and because they're limited editions and they're mostly hardcovers, do some papers, they're quite expensive, so it's worth going for that. The only criticism I would make of New Con is that their postage is quite expensive, but you know, it is a labour of love. They put a lot of stuff out there and Ian works very hard on it alongside his own writing, so it's not to be sniffed at. So do have a look at the New Con site, and one day I'll do a video showing you the New Con books I've got. I've only got a few. They've done loads and loads and loads, and they do really important work. Anyway, so there's some great short stories for you to get your teeth into. Then we move on into Chris's trilogy, the Eden trilogy. The first one, Dark Eden, came out in 2013, won the Arthur C. Clarke Award. And as you see, these are the 2 sequels, Mother of Eden and Daughter of Eden, all available in paperback, of course, from Corvus. And wonderful world building. And it's very sort of like, it's kind of cross between Hothouse, really. I would say it's probably the closest thing that comes to, except it's a very cold world. And I talked about it extensively in my video a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to talk about it again. Just urge you to look back to that video. And if you're a hardcore genre SF writer who likes all the classic tropes, this is really where you should start, I would say. Though personally, I think you're better to start with Holy Machine and Marcher and then move on to these. And these were a big success for Chris. As you see, they don't have an entirely uniform livery. This one in paperback had a similar livery to these 2, and again you'll see that in previous videos on the channel. But I'm really pleased to have all 3 in first editions. I didn't have this one, and it took me a while to track it down because it's quite an expensive book. Obviously, being an Arthur C. Clarke Award winner, it sells really well. Everybody scrabbles to get a first edition for it, goes into reprint, and that pushes the value up. So if you're looking out for a copy of Dark Eden in hardcover, it may cost you a pretty penny. And there's the rear of the jackets, just for those of you who'd like to see them. And I think you'll agree they're very beautifully designed, particularly Dark Eden is really nice. And down here you'll see that was the then current cover for Holy Machine from Corvus. I do have that one signed. And also that was the cover for Dark Eden. I've got a copy of that signed as well. This one is signed. Most of my Becketts are signed from the times we've met. I've not actually got Chris to sign these for me, so next time I see him I must take them along and get them signed, because he's such a good guy. He really is. The thing with Chris is he's so modest about his talent, which is enormous, and he should be absolutely huge. But I think it was Alistair Reynolds said, you know, he's not the sort of guy who will be at a convention and be trumpeting about how great his work is. He just gets the work done and lets it speak for itself. And, you know, the trouble with that, as I think Alistair points out, is that often, you know, that means that people ignore it. You know, it just is more reflection on those people than the work itself. But it would be nice to see him getting more sales and more acclaim, because he's absolutely fantastic guy. There is a video on the channel from last November in which I travelled to London to Forbidden Planet, to the multi-author signing for this book, Reports from the Deep End, and as you see, Chris Beckett was there, and you'll see Chris on that. And Chris has been really unwell the last couple of years, but he's really moving on leaps and bounds now, and he looks a lot better, and he's working on a new book, which is really exciting. So this is why I want to get this overview done, because when the new one comes out, I think it'll probably be next year rather than this year, I'll be giving it a full review and coverage, because I'm really looking forward to see what he does next. After the Eden trilogy, Chris then moved into what I call more of his New Wave period. I call it that because, of course, New Wave suggests literary and experimental SF. And these are very much in that tradition. They're still genre SF, but they are really pushing the boundaries. And that's something I really like. And I think Chris there is probably showing his influences, which is not a bad thing. And this is America City, which came out in 2017. And I got Chris down to Bath, as I say, to do an event with me with this, and it was really great to meet him, and he's a fantastic guy. This is set in a near future America. It's about a young woman who is British and she works in social media, and there's a kind of Twitter type thing called the Whisper Stream, and she gets involved with that, and there's a populist American president, and this is before Donald Trump became president. And it was written before that anyway. By the time it was published, Trump had become president. And he's quite sort of bullish, and she goes to work for him because it's a career opportunity. There are ethical issues around that. And it's about American expansionism and immigration again, and there are implications for Canada. And it's really good. You know, it's subtle. It's a sort of near future thing that a regular reader could understand. So it's that 5 minutes in the future thing, but it's done really well. And that really is my kind of favorite sort of SF that reflects very directly what's going on around us in the real world. And it was an absolute joy to meet Chris then, and we really bonded. And I remember John Jarrett, his agent, was there as well. And John and I had talked on the phone years before. Never got around to meeting. It was great to finally meet John as well. And it was a fantastic night. Really enjoyed it. So that's America City. Possibly my favourite later book by Chris is Beneath the World a Sea, which I only read comparatively recently, and as you see, it's got an absolutely gorgeous cover and is set in Latin America. Do you remember a while ago I was talking about all these British SF and slipstream novels that had things about damp in them and jungles and Latin American feel? And this is about a Latin American country, South American country I should say, where there's this huge sea underneath what appears to be a Sargasso type area, and this policeman goes there to investigate these beings who live there, and they're kind of aliens, but they're not really extraterrestrial, and there are clashes between them and the local people, and it's pretty hallucinatory. The characters are really well done. The dialogue's really good. I know Chris's wife said she felt that this was his best book, his most fully realised book, his most mature book, and you know, she does have a point actually. I would agree with that. And if you've recently read Dark Eden or the Eden trilogy and you want something, it's not the same as that, but it's a similar feel. It's this jungle feel. Of course, Dark Eden is all about a cold planet, a cold forest planet. This is slightly different. This is Earth, and it's a tropical and neotropical set book. I really would recommend this, and I absolutely loved it, and I think it's a fantastic book, and it should have been a huge bestseller. Absolutely fantastic. Absolutely brilliant, surreal book with amazing spiky characterization, which you can really relate to. You can really see the characters. They really come to life, and marvelous stuff. If you've enjoyed things like Martin McInnes's Gathering Evidence, if you've enjoyed Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, I really recommend this, because this is a kind of zone novel as well in lots of ways. This is Two Tribes. Anybody old enough to remember the 80s will know what that reference is to. The Frankie Goes to Hollywood song, Two Tribes, which is about the Cold War and the clash of ideologies. And this is usually described as Chris's Brexit novel. Now, don't sigh and get bored, because it is an SF novel. It's set in the 23rd century, where climate change has really been full blown. It's pretty unpleasant. And it's about a young woman called Zoe who is doing a historical research. She's a historian. And she comes across some diaries belonging to two people from 200 years previously, our present, a man and a woman who accidentally meet. They begin to have a relationship, but they're on different sides of the Brexit divide. And it really gives a different perspective, the perspective that we might have in the future looking back at those days. And it also looks at where we're headed as well. So it is political. It is pretty British, I guess, in that respect, but it would be interesting for people on the other side of the pond to read as well. And it's really well written, and it made me think of the kind of thing that Ballard would have done if he had stuck with the more straight ahead SF route, because I say this is an SF novel, but it's a literary one and with some very definite things to say, and I really enjoyed it. It's worth reading this in comparison with Fugue from a Darkening Island by Christopher Priest. It's very different to that in many ways, but the two together would make an interesting comparison, because the gulf between them is pretty big, but there are some similarities as well. So it is worth a look. And absolutely stunning book, as you can see, and it's available in this livery from Corvus in paperback. Chris's most recent novel is Tomorrow, which, as you see, has an absolutely gorgeous jacket, and this came out in 2021. And this is where he steps away from SF, or does he? The thing I can most compare this to, and again it's different to it, but it's the only thing I can think that's comparable, is Priest's Dream Archipelago series, particularly the Affirmation, and it has commonalities of the Affirmation. And of course Chris has a different style to Chris Priest, so it's interesting again to compare the two, and he is his own man. And this is the narrative, the first person narrative of somebody who wants to write a novel, the ultimate novel that will not have any of the limitations of any novel so far. And he goes to live in a small town by a river, and again it has the feel of Latin America, where he's going to write this book, and he gets involved with local people. He makes several false starts, and you see this sliding and meshing of consciousness going on, which is similar to that in Ice by Anna Kavan, where you're not sure who is narrating or what is narrating or where it's going. And it's very avant-garde and experimental. So if you like things like The Affirmation and Ice, I really recommend this. And there were signs that he was moving in this direction when Spring Tide came out, and this is sort of the full-blown version. So it's really going to be interesting to see what he does with the new book, which direction he goes in. I don't think this was massively commercially successful. Going from my experience, I didn't sell that many copies, sadly. I reviewed it right at the beginning of the channel, but for anybody who's concerned with SF as an experimental form, this is really important stuff. And this is the point about Chris. Like Dave Hutchinson, like Adam Roberts, like Nina Allen, all these people who are in the sort of 50s or the 60s, I think most of these people are around about 60 now. You know, it's really hard to be a literary new wave style SF writer in Britain, because since the space opera Renaissance, which Ian Banks brought to us, that sort of writing has been pushed on the back foot, and that's why it's taken so long for these people to develop careers. Whereas people like Priest and M. John Harrison built up their careers and go gradually more experimental and new wavy. For this guys, it was a lot harder because they weren't churning out the old formulaic trilogies. So for anybody interested in British SF and where it's going, and looking back also at its comparison to the glorious days of the 60s and 70s and early 80s, when there really was wonderful levels of experimentation going on, and rubbing out that line between the mainstream and genre, Chris Beckett is the one to go for. So I think you'll agree these are very beautiful books. I do hope you pick them up and read them. I recommend all of them unreservedly, and I hope to hear from you that you are reading them. And for those of you who watched the Dark Eden video, thank you very much. Do move on to these and let me know what you think. Favourites, I would say Holy Machine I've talked about a lot. I like Marcher a heck of a lot. I'm a really big fan of Beneath the World of Sea. So I would say Holy Machine, Marcher, Beneath the World of Sea, probably the ones which pop up as favourites in my book. I love them all. They're all superlative works of science fiction literature. Thanks for watching. See you again soon. Bye for now.